knowledge of astronomy. His measurements of the external dimensions yielded figures that matched pi even more closely than Taylor's had to the fifth digit beyond the decimal point. Smith was in agreement with Taylor's opinion that the Great Pyramid enshrined the ancients' scientific knowledge. Its built-in measures were more admirably and learnedly earth-commensurable, he wrote, than anything which has ever entered into the mind of man to conceive. Smith even went beyond Taylor to claim that measure of time, as well as of distance, were incorporated into the building of the pyramid. According to the astronomer, the structure's perimeter in pyramid inches equalled precisely 1,000 times 365.2 the number of days in a solar year. The builders had worked all of this out with their breathtaking gift for physics, Smith wrote, 1,500 years before the infantine beginning of such things among the ancient Greeks. In his subsequent book, Our Inheritance in the Great Pyramid, Smith concluded, as had Taylor before him, that only God could have engineered the Great Pyramid. The Bible, he said, states that in ages past God imparted wisdom and metrical instructions for buildings to a chosen few for some special and unknown purpose. In later years, Smith argued that the pyramid also revealed the distance from the earth to the sun when its height in inches was multiplied by 10 to the ninth power, 10 to 9 being the proportion of height to width of the pyramid. In addition, the structure not only proved the existence of God, but also predicted the date of the second coming of Christ. Right, let's have a little look at the illustrations here. So, this illustration and this one are maps of the Giza Plateau, suggesting the role of extraordinary geographical knowledge in the Great Pyramid's construction. So, here is a plan of the plateau showing the exact north-south alignment of the pyramids. And on the left, an expanded review reveals that the structure stands at the apex of the Nile Delta. Although Smith's colourful writing style helped sell his books, he failed to win over many of his scientific colleagues. Egyptologists denounced him, and a fellow member of the Royal Society of Edinburgh called his ideas strange hallucinations, which only a few weak women believe. A critic from the United States drolly expressed the skeptic's view that numbers could be marshalled to prove almost anything. If a suitable unit of measurement is found, he said, an exact equivalent to the distance to Timbuktu is certain to be found. In the number of street lamps in Bond Street, or the specific gravity of mud, or the mean weight of adult goldfish. Even so, the work of Taylor and Smith bred many disciples who found that the more they investigated the Great Pyramid, the more hidden spiritual, scientific, and historical system of measures based on sacred pyramid cubits, in opposition to the atheistic metric system. President James Garfield was a member of the organisation. Clearly, the pyramid controversy required the illumination of pure science, unencumbered by preconceptions or wishful thinking, and in 1880, a 26-year-old Englishman with the ponderous name of William Matthew Flinders Petrie set out for Egypt with an array of sophisticated instruments, hoping to resolve all speculation about the structure's dimensions and alignment. Flinders Petrie, as he was called, was well qualified by degree and training for such a task. His maternal grandfather and namesake, Captain Matthew Flinders, was known for his explorations of Australia. His father, William Petrie, was an engineer who had been so struck by the writings of Taylor and Smith that he became a dedicated pyramidologist himself, spending 20 years in the design and fabrication of special surveying equipment that would measure the Great Pyramid with unprecedented precision. Following his father's lead, the young Flinders Petrie read Smith's book at the age of 13. Enchanted by the notion of varying standards of measure, Petrie took up the surveyor's trade and devoted himself to touring through England and painstakingly recording the dimensions of various buildings and ancient megalithic sites such as the great stone circles of Stonehenge. When he arrived at the Giza Plateau with his ample store of provisions and the crates bearing his father's carefully crafted instruments, Petrie did, as so many other pyramid explorers had done before him, and took up temporary residence in an empty cliffside tomb. Then he went to work, meticulously measuring and remeasuring every conceivable dimension of the Great Pyramid and its two smaller neighbours. To keep curious and bothersome British sightseers at bay, he sometimes went about his outdoor tasks clad only in vest and pants, both a shocking pink. In the hot, dusty interior of the pyramid, he often worked nude and late at night, after the irksome tourists had departed. The work was not without its hazards, as a friend, a certain Dr. Grant, found when he joined the surveyor one night. "I had a terrifying time when he fainted in the well," wrote Petrie. To raise a very heavy man, barely conscious, up a shaft of 70 feet with scanty foothold, when at any moment he might sweep me away down to the bottom, was a risk not to be forgotten. Petrie was astounded by the precision of the pyramid stonework. Using instruments that were accurate to a tenth of an inch, he reported that the errors in the edifice, both in length and in angles, were so slight that a thumb would cover them. The walls of the descending passageway were within a quarter-inch of being perfectly straight for their 350-foot length. He compared the joining of the casing stones to the finest optician's work on a scale of acres. The quality began to deteriorate, however, in the anteroom of the king's chamber, leading the youthful surveyor to speculate that the original architect had not finished the job. The results of Petrie's labours, published in an 1883 book entitled The Pyramids and Temples of Giza, 755.4. Even more impressive, the sides were almost perfectly aligned to the cardinal points of the compass. The French savant Jonnard had estimated the height correctly at 481 feet, but he had miscalculated the angle of the sides, which is 51 degrees, 52 minutes. But even after Petrie effectively dismantled it, the pyramidologist's theory refused to die, and new discoveries continued to surface throughout the 20th century. British engineer David Davidson, who began as a scornful agnostic and 25 years later became a true believer, managed to reconcile Petrie's findings with Smith's through a complex set of calculations that factored in the virtually invisible hollowing of the pyramid's walls, which are in fact not completely flat, but very slightly concave. Petrie had taken this into account, Davidson said, but had not extended his computations to the original outer casing. When this was done, according to Davidson, Smith turned out to be right about the perimeter, representing the solar year. In 1924, Davidson, the erstwhile doubter, wound up publishing a dense 568-page book that concluded that the pyramid was truth in structural form. The measurement school would continue to arise accusations of number juggling among the scientific establishment. The modern skeptical author, Martin Gardner, for example, has poked sly fun at the fiveness obsession of Joseph Seiss by applying the same criteria to America's Washington Monument. Not only, says Gardner, is its height 555 feet 5 inches, but its base is 5 feet 5 square, and its windows are 500 feet from the base. Gardner's so-called monument foot yields a base of 56.5 feet, which when multiplied by the capstone weight gives a number very close to the speed of light. Could this be coincidence? Asks Gardner. The pyramid's dimensions have not been the only subject of scrutiny, however. At the same time that Petrie and Davidson were counting cubits, other British scholars were looking to the skies. In the late 19th century, British astronomer Richard Proctor pioneered the approach to pyramid studies that would come to be called archaeoastronomy. Proctor's research findings showed that before it was completed, the Great Pyramid might have been used as an astronomical observatory, as both Arab historians and the Roman writer Proclus had maintained. The British astronomer argued that the perfect north-south alignment of the interior passages, together with their 26-degree angle, enabled the Egyptians to use them as the equivalent of a telescope. By sighting celestial phenomena through the opening at the end of the passageway, ancient stargazers might have mapped the northern heavens. Those stationed in the pyramid's grand gallery, he called them watchmen of the night, could have charted the transit of the principal stars across an arc of about 80 degrees. When the passages were ultimately sealed off, however, these watchmen would have lost their vantage points. Egyptologists retorted that Egyptian science was not that advanced, but Proctor's thesis received considerable support when eminent British astronomer Sir J. Norman Lockyer published his book about pyramids and the stars, The Dawn of Astronomy, in 1894. Lockyer was not a man to be ignored. Discoverer of helium, a Fellow of the Royal Society, and a scholar knighted by Queen Victoria for his accomplishments. his assistants, carefully opening a set of nested doors leading to the long-hidden sarcophagus of Tutankhamun. Few treasures and no kingly remains have been found in the pyramids, but the discovery made by Egyptologist Howard Carter has served as a reminder and perhaps a warning of what could be in these monuments. In November of 1922, after 15 years of digging in the Valley of the Kings south of Cairo, Carter and his financial backer, George Edward Herbert, 5th Earl of Carnarvon, broke through the sealed entryway to a sunken tomb. There they discovered a magnificent collection of vases, chariots, thrones and jewels. This, they knew, was the resting place of Pharaoh Tutankhamun, familiarly known as Tut. Yet apprehension attended the triumph. Rumour had it that hieroglyphics warned of vengeance on intruders. A cobra, the symbol of Egyptian royalty, had devoured a canary belonging to Carter. To some, the meaning was clear. A terrible punishment would befall those who violated Tut's tomb. Undaunted, the expeditioners spent the next year excavating before opening the chamber containing Tut's sarcophagus, but Lord Carnarvon did not live to see it. He died of blood poisoning months earlier, the victim, some said, of a pharaoh's curse. Okay, so let's go back to the main reading. Werner von Siemens, founder of the giant German electrical company that bears his name, had stopped at Giza in that year while shepherding a crew of engineers to the Red Sea, where they were to lay a telegraph cable. Ever curious and venturesome, Siemens set out to scramble to the summit of the pyramid. As he laboured up the sides, the desert wind raised a pale mist of sand around him. Reaching the top, Siemens struck a victorious pose and jabbed a finger into the air. At that, a prickling sensation ran through his finger, and a sharp noise rang out. The effect was similar to a mild electric shock. Siemens, who knew a thing or two about the infant science of electricity, decided to conduct a test. Wrapping wet paper around a metal-necked wine bottle, he improvised a Leyden jar, a simple device for storing static electricity. When he held this contrivance above his head, Siemens was gratified to discover that the bottle became electrically charged, generating sparks when touched. In itself, Siemens' electrical experience may not be particularly noteworthy. Under certain atmospheric conditions, others have noticed similar effects atop tall, pointed buildings, but it is more difficult to match the even stranger phenomenon reported in the early 1930s by a French ironmonger named Antoine Bovis. According to Bovis, he had been touring the King's Chamber in about 1920 when he came across the remains of several cats and other small animals that apparently had died in the pyramid. Curiously, the bodies had no odour. When he examined them, Bovis found that the animals had dehydrated and mummified despite the chamber's humidity. Back home in Nice, the Frenchman determined to learn about this oddity. After building a wooden model of the pyramid, he oriented it Davidson's research subjects included alfalfa sprouts and his pet poodle. The sprouts grew faster in a model pyramid, and the dog, after sleeping inside one for several weeks, became a vegetarian. Like Duval, Flanagan decided to go into the pyramid business, marketing both tents and energy plates made of several tiny pyramids fused together, which he maintained would energize anything placed on them. The pyramid power idea did not fare well among most scientists, however. Stanford Research Institute experiments at the Great Pyramid showed that food stored inside deteriorated normally. Geologist Charles Cazot and anthropologist Stuart Scott conducted research of their own, reporting with amusement that eggs came out of our pyramid after 43 days, a smelly, runny yellow and full of sediment. Tomatoes in pyramids fared no better than those in brown paper bags. We were unable to sharpen razor blades. Researchers continued to pursue the enduring questions about the Great Pyramid itself, the who and how and why that have perplexed travellers to Giza for more than 2 millennia. In the mid-1980s, Egyptologists designed the first highly detailed map of the Giza Plateau in an effort to learn more about the pyramid's construction. Using sophisticated theodolites, instruments that measure angles, and aerial photographs, archaeologist Mark Lehner and his crew detected nearby quarries and deduced a method by which the ancient builders might have created the pyramid's amazingly level base. Trenches cut into the rock could have been filled with water. Wooden surveying stakes would then have been inserted into the water and marked against its naturally level surface. Other theorists have sought to explain how the Egyptians could have cut stone so precisely and hauled it so far. French chemist Joseph Davidovits went a step further, claiming in 1974 that they were chemists rather than stonemasons, basing his conclusion on analysis of pyramid rock samples. Davidovits maintained that the huge blocks were cast, not cut. In the Davidovits scenario, a body-like substance was formed the summer solstice, the sun forms the hieroglyph for horizon, a sun setting